So hi, everyone. Happy Friday. I'd like to welcome our guest, Lauren Mason Carris. Her topic is on UX copy and content. She is a VP of Learning and Design at Penny AI Technology. And Lauren, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to share my screen. So great to be here today. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. And thank you for those of you who are able to attend. UX copy and content. It's not exactly a topic that maybe even 6 months ago, I thought I would be so connected to explicitly as I am today. And I'll explain more as we go through this presentation. You'll see why it has really come up and how fitting actually it is for my personal identity, but also my professional career and trajectory. So as mentioned, I am a VP of Learning and Design at Penny AI, but I self-identify as a word nerd and as an identity researcher. Actually, my professional training and academic training is in applied linguistics, and it was actually language development, curriculum, development for language learners, and in a multilingual and global environment that I am a lover and explorer of all things technology and user experience. At the time, I was, it was just at the beginning of e-learning. And so I was fortunate enough to have a lot of tools at my disposal and a lot of support in my professional environments to explore different tools and ecosystems and bring those in for different kinds of learners, and got really curious about ecosystems of learning and ecosystems of content that learners are exposed to. And so there was a really nice mapping towards user experience, because in fact, learning design is about the end user. And so it was that pathway, and my personal passion for words and how they do and don't translate, and the experience that you can create actually through words and symbols. A lot of research on semiotics, and a lot of research on that now is super popular around like emojis and icons. And, it's really found its way into user experience, both research and design, and lots of conversations with other UX experts who say they always have to explain what they do to people, because people outside of the industry don't really know. And it's quite interesting because, again, power of words. My other area of research really around identity and the ways that individuals understand themselves in the context of others plays into this as well, because it's through creating meaning and connection, right? Through sharing language and symbols and systems that we learn to identify with or identify against other groups. And so things as simple as our clothes, or the way that we are wearing our hair, or the way that we gesture, which is not necessarily spoken language, right? But a lot of other sign systems that we use. And you might find some, if you Google my name and look at different identity research, I have done quite a bit on accent and performativity, and ways that individuals actually reclaim power through language, through accent, through pronunciation, and often, explore identity that way too. So as a self-identified word nerd and identity researcher, it's so exciting to actually see my personal interests, my personal career trajectory. Really, I think any career pathway has the opportunity to be non-traditional, but mine certainly coming from, academia and learning design and curriculum development into this space now. It feels really complete and having come full circle, which is super exciting. So when we think about UX, and when we think about UX copy, it is an invitation, right? Or it can be an invitation. It can be validation, and it can also simultaneously be rejection, right? In fact, I think it's one of one of many technological things that happened during COVID and during the pandemic, where more people are engaging in video meetings than ever before. More people started to really understand the impact of what's happening in our backgrounds and what we're able to show other people or choose to show other people or not. And these are all sign systems, right? And we are intentionally or unintentionally creating connections or invitations with others. Right. And it's a really, really, come to light, I would say, in the education space, especially, and certainly in corporate and workspaces, thinking about power dynamics and thinking about how we're, connecting and inviting people to show up, to engage, and what happens or doesn't happen through the sign systems that we have. And this certainly translates to UX copy. In particular, but UX in general, right? And something also really interesting, you can see now I made a change in the font size. UX micro copy is really interesting too, because in theory, it's short, right? It is what provides context for individuals in an experience. And oftentimes it is informational. And so it's the strings of words or the instruction lines or the direction that we are giving a user about how to navigate or where they should go or what they should do or how their potential anxieties might be, softened, or how their fears might be assuaged, right? And so when we think about UX, really making sure that we are empathetic with our end user and anticipating some of those points of frustration is certainly where microcopy then can come in handy. And quite interesting because lots of research on the ROI of, experimenting and modifying copy and micro copy, especially in the user experience, is oftentimes much cheaper in the long run with a higher impact than redesigning UI or navigation, right? If you're in a pinch, you're able to maybe add some instruction lines that can be really helpful for a user while you wait for the budget or the timeline to actually make some of the bigger UI and kind of UX changes, right? So this all came to light in my experience at Penny. And I actually came to Penny to design a learning experience and a learning and onboarding solution, which is super exciting. And I could talk to you all about that and the UX around it and experimentation and empathy with users at another time. But it was really not originally part of the scope of my work, but because of my background, my expertise, my interest in these areas, that we actually discovered an opportunity that I then started to do some investigation around. And so at Penny, we are an AI technology platform. What we do is actually optimize the day-to-day experience of our end users through their day-to-day activities. So they have to take action in the app in order for it to be optimized and in order for us to then generate the next best action. And really, it's a social sales enablement platform. And so the idea is that it helps independent sellers, especially independent sellers not familiar with sales, know who to reach out to, what to do next. Think of a CRM on steroids, right? Who do I connect with? What should I be telling them? And we use lots of data and prior experiences and other user experiences to then generate these best recommended actions. And the whole point is to speed up their sales and at the end of the day, simplify their life. So this is where we are. The user has a couple of different persona types that we look at. So at the end of the day, they are all independent consultants, but the job for them to do in some cases is sell, as indicated earlier. So that's the actual seller. In some cases, it's to consult with their clientele, right? So some work needs to be done. They need to kind of consult with them and explain things, before they make a sale. We also have a persona type that is the leader, where they have many different independent sellers that don't exactly report up to them, but we'll use that kind of a framework. And so they are leaders looking to mentor and coach their team members, and certainly influence the industry based on whatever products or whatever their brand is. And what's really interesting about this industry is it is all based on relationships and reputation. And so we are a SaaS company, and we serve several different clients, as well as our own product that is direct to consumer. So our persona types and our use cases and our challenges are quite dynamic in that regard. But the biggest challenge has been relating to these users, all from these different types of industries, these different kind of brand identities, different jargon that they might be using. And in this model that we have, where we're both supporting clients, right, enterprise clients, and creating maybe a white label solution, and maintain our own core product to directly work with end users, managing the UX and certainly the components and the terminology and the language and the UI and the copy, it's just kind of like grown and grown. And very typical for a startup, we had to do a lot of things early on to grow, right, to get there. And now we're at this moment of scale up where we can't afford to I won't say ignore, that's too strong because it was never really ignored, but we can't afford to not resolve some of these persistent issues. And so that's where I came in. We started to notice, okay, we say that we support global adoption and global rollout, but what does that really mean when so many of our clients are doing this at a different pace, have a different audience, have a different market, and we have our own brand? Like, really looking at that complex web started to get exciting and really interesting. And so really, maintaining that strong brand identity that we have to be a premier solution and still maintain our clients' strong brand, while maximizing user engagement and user relevance, all the things I talked about before, right? A user interfaces with a product, with a screen. If they don't see themselves in it, or they don't see that the language is relevant to them or the experience, they're likely to not use it anymore, right? So great, you've got all these great features, all of these great experiences down the road, but in those first couple of instances, if they're not engaged and they don't feel like it's for them, engagement rate has a pretty high risk of attrition or even lack of adoption really early on. And keeping in mind that we also have then these multiple markets, languages, and contexts, this has become a super interesting topic now for me to really try to tackle. So our approach was, in the early days when we had only a couple of enterprise clients, though 100,000 end users, which is a great product story, right? But we only had to manage a couple of our clients. It was manageable. And so we thought, great, the best way to market will be to automate some of these translations. Even though we will use humans to do the translations, the best course of getting that code to be translated and back into our experience, we've got to automate those things in some way. And so let's do some alphabetical strings based on multiple glossaries, and we will manage this in a very structured, way. Great, checks out. Until it didn't. Because then we started to hit these multiple environments, and some of the code started sort of like seeping into other, like some of the terminology another client might start to see, or one of the translation rules that we created then didn't pertain to the other group. And so not sure if you all are familiar, but the sales regulations in the Asian market are completely different from the European market. And the European market not exactly the same as the North American market, but some similarities. And so this is not only an issue of literal translation, it's an issue of things that we call like translocation or transcreation or localization, but then also these multiple glossaries and some business decisions for some of these clients. And so we started to really think about like, whoa, this going global is so much bigger than just translation. And so my tagline for this whole discovery project was literally lost in translation. Not only was our request of the partners that we were working with for these translation projects lost in translation, right? Like we didn't, at the time, they didn't know how to categorize or define what quality might look like. We didn't know what we didn't know. So we got what we asked for and we didn't know anything else. So we discovered and learned a lot more about contextualization, about localization, about glossary management. A real wow and aha moment was in the case of our European rollout. We actually had to do an audit because our one client, by the way, we didn't get any user feedback to say something was wrong. So there was no indicator, and the quality of the string, alphabetical string translations was perfect because it was decontextualized, right? So think about translating a glossary. Great, translated a glossary, awesome. In the user experience though, it didn't really feel right. And it couldn't be pinpointed. Nobody quite knew how to describe it, just to say that it was poor quality. Well, what does that mean? Right. And so really trying to go through, we had to do an audit actually and take a couple of use cases. And it was the unfortunate situation where in the case of German, you can look this up and Google it later, but look for the translations for the term leader. And you will see lots of different things come up, and out of context, there are some really offensive references to historical leaders who have been pretty egregious in their lack of humanity. And it wasn't intentional because the direct translation was accurate. It wasn't wrong, but in the context then that it started to appear, came off as super offensive. And there was no way that we could have anticipated that without doing localization or even having discovered the issue. And sadly, it was from a user experience through the client that then came to us. And so we were like, hold up, let's roll back our translations. Let's go through an audit. Let's look at what quality means. And we noticed a lot of nuances around formal and informal. And it's different for each one of those languages in the European market. German has a much higher tolerance for formal register, where Dutch does not. And any of you who might know Spanish know that there are then lots of other ways to indicate formality in addition to just the choice of one word, right? And so there's like so many nuances here. We had to look at tone and voice. We had to look at gender neutrality, and where we as a brand wanted to highlight the fact of our like diversity and inclusion. And we've got, this great approach for gender neutrality. It didn't actually translate because in German, it doesn't, you can't do the same, you don't have the same patterns of gender neutrality, right? And so we had to make some decisions for certain languages that even our clients had not really thought through. The user interface, for example, when you're writing code, sometimes we were using capital or sometimes lowercase because it was all in English and we knew what it was. But the second you go to translate that, in the case of German, there are rules about what is capitalized or not. And so when that seeped through in the code, if something was miscapitalized or not, it came off as an indicator of something not unintentional, right? So the issue around proper nouns, the issue around even quotes. In French, quotes are used differently. And so in code, when you use quotes, I mean, just all of these issues that we were not thinking about in the early days. Grammar and syntax, in some cases, I think are the most obvious. That's where people go most. Like, obviously, a slogan is not going to translate. Obviously, the sentiment that you have is not going to translate. And that's typically what gets handled in localization. But all of these other patterns that were much more nuanced was quite interesting to explore. Also, the visual expansion. There's a generalization around 30% expansion or even 70% expansion in the case of Russian, right? So your text fields and your buttons or like information just running off the page, a horrible user experience, to not feel like your language and what you are trying to get out of it. I mean, that whole idea that you're being cut off all the time. This clearly was not made for me, right? I don't want to use it. And so, and also things like help text and notifications, right? Another really interesting insight was our founders and our really early days, and I think this is common for a lot of startups. I'm going to say bro culture, but you can translate that to whatever you want. But a lot of times there's a little bit of like kind of cheeky jargon that seeps its way into just kind of like throw some UI, we're going to design this and just like put some copy in there and we'll fix it later. And then these slogans or these things, like they stay because the business moves on and they don't get resolved. And so we had this effort scale: easy does it, crank it up, and freight train. And it turns out that freight train and crank it up and easy does it were 3 trail names in the headquarters of where our business was started. And it made like personal connection and startup. And it was a really great startup story too, because then when there was investment in that local area, people knew the references and it was like, oh, that's so great. That's so awesome. Well, it doesn't really translate well, right? It's not an intuitive effort scale. And in fact, freight train is slow. And in the Dutch case, they were like, what are you trying to do here? Because if nobody in Europe uses a freight train, why would anybody want to do it? That seems like a lot of effort and really, really heavy. And so after explaining these slogans, we noticed, wow, well, biking culture actually does translate in the case of Dutch and the Netherlands. And so having that conversation with the translator, we were able to find an effort scale that was culturally intuitive and resonated with the cultural experience, but never in an alphabetical word, list of strings would have ever even have been noticed. And so if you're familiar with, Dutch biking culture and the Netherlands, there's city bikes are all over the place, racing bikes or road bikes, which are, a little bit stronger. And then there's the box bike or the cargo bike, which a lot of moms will use, or a lot of caregivers will use, or folks who are also just commuting a lot of, moving around different places. So you can hold other passengers and other belongings and carry things along and just like really move along with effortlessly. Right. And so this was a really fun kind of localization project there that really took it out, to the next level. Another nuance from Dutch is that so the biking culture is translatable or culturally relatable. Excessive comments are not. And we see in UX for a lot of different apps and a lot of different mobile experiences, to increase engagement, we want to use some sort of motivational commentary, like good job, way to go, all of this like cheerleading. And it's awesome until it doesn't really work. And so this excessive complimenting came off as phony in the Dutch experience. And I think it is similar for more languages than just Dutch, but being careful about what we understand in the North American context to be supportive and motivational needed to be toned down, in fact, for other languages. And it's not because we want to reduce motivational cues, it's because we had to do it in the right context. So instead of you're a rock star, you're great was much better. Or instead of I rock, I work hard was better. And that was, pun intended, kind of a hard pill to swallow for some of our, dev team members who were like, but that's not what we're trying to convey. Well, we can keep it in the English context and in the North American context, but we do have to be a little bit more sensitive in some of the other contexts because it just comes off as phony. So ideation, at first we're like, what are we going to do? Let's just look at the core product offering by language, and we will do these translations by language request. And then we expanded to start looking at multiple glossaries, and we had to start doing these sort of discoveries of translations, as I mentioned before, across an ecosystem. What are the other tools they're using even, or how do the buttons sort of navigate? And then it expanded even more, and we started looking at multiple varieties because, hello, there isn't just one Spanish. And a Spanish speaker in South America will know immediately if it's Castilian Spanish, and will know immediately, is this for me or not for me, and vice versa, right? And so actually technically enabling multiple varieties of a language was something that we had to actually go through discovery, because not all of our other tools in our ecosystem, if you think about Intercom, for example, which is customer facing, they didn't necessarily match in terms of the breadth or depth of languages that they supported. So some of our internal tools supported multiple varieties. Other of our internal tools only allowed for one variety. So what do? Are you going to offer Castilian user interface and on the front end, and then Latin American customer service? That's okay if that's your business decision, but then you've got to articulate that and let your users know and help them so that it doesn't feel like you're just not aware, right? And so that was a really big discovery. And then also thinking about multiple languages per country, where we had done a lot of geotagging, right? So this country will offer this language, and it checks out when you're trying to be really structured that way. But then you get to a country like Switzerland, and you've got to enable multiple languages, or you get to a country like the US, and you should probably still enable multiple languages, right? So kind of exploring, technically speaking, how we are going to really support different users in different environments. And then, of course, it exploded even more. How do certain clients maybe want to turn off certain languages because they don't want to go through the hassle of having to be responsible for some of that translocation? So nope, we got to turn it off, where we had only considered enabling languages, not actually managing turning some of them off, right? And again, multiple glossaries, also thinking about at what point is the effort worth the investment and the return for making some of those copy changes, longer form copy changes or UI changes, and how do we manage that? And ultimately getting to a place of translation service, right? So not every client of ours has style guides. Not every client of ours has translation style guides, right? The work that I showed earlier from the Dutch and the German use cases and some of our early, European language rollout discovery, those were insights that we gathered. Not every client is even aware of that. And so starting to think about these as services where we could support them in their global rollouts, not just to deliver a front-end translation, right? This is really a much more comprehensive experience. And of course, looking at discovery for additional languages that weren't already on our roadmap, because the rate of change and globalization, the likelihood of our clients to want to expand in different markets, different regions, different languages, out of sync with the others, is a little bit more likely. And so we've got to get our roadmap really structured and straight, know what we can enable with quality, and then engage and entertain what might be on the roadmap for then future discovery. So lots that we learned. In the end, was the client happy? We're still working on it. They are happier. We are rebuilding trust. We are all learning that this was a much bigger effort than just translate the front end and deliver to a global market. But I think that is typical, for a lot of other projects also. On the surface, something seems straightforward. And so you go ahead and do it. And then you do a little discovery, you validate a little bit, you learn a lot, and you discover then what might need to be done to adapt and iterate even from there. So one of the tool tips, we actually had to make a migration to a different translation service and translation tooling system. And we're really happy with Smartling for a couple of reasons. It integrates very seamlessly with Figma so that we can actually see some of that expansion, so that we can get ahead of owning our UX copy as part of the whole user experience while we are designing, not as a separate thing. It also integrates really nicely with GitHub, and we have lots of robust translation management tools, tooling, visualization, support from the best of the best translators. And so we are really happy with this migration. And the fails, sadly, sometimes the ship had already, or the train had already left the station, right? Like the code had already gone out. And so really getting in the practice of communicating and resetting expectations, or giving our client-facing teams scripts that they could respond to clients with. I mean, there's a lot that's already out there. And so we're still in the process of refining the quality and moving to this newer strategy. But really, the train has left. So being able to then let folks know, what has already shipped, what needs still to be worked on, how we're working to get there, and give our, like I said, client-facing teams the confidence to give our clients the confidence in us, has been a lot of effort. But the wins, I think, are absolutely worth it. Really evangelizing the relevance of this kind of work, really doing the due diligence and looking at the impact of it for end users, for global users in an industry that is really rooted in relationships and reputation. We can't afford to ignore it. Right. And so being able to really document and present a case for why this is important, but also track that to data and track some of the insights that I shared with you, for example, and some others, has been really, really awesome for us. At Penny, we have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging group. It is I call it grassroots because there's no hierarchy, and it's really, at all levels of the organization. And I happen to be on the committee as well. And it was through that partnership that we've actually been able to influence some of our clients to change even some of their UI and copy to be a little bit more inclusive. And so that's a huge win. But I included a little screenshot here, and you can actually, if you distribute this deck, you can click on it. There's a hyperlink to our people page. And it's really important that we are not only doing this work for our end users, but we're also regularly evaluating, it's never perfect, but regularly evaluating the copy that we have across our user experience for our employees. Where are we potentially creating an experience of not belonging, or not including them, right? And so we've really, really used this as an opportunity across the board, both for end users, for our clients, and for our team members as well. The skills, we notice a whole new skill set that we need to really explore and consider. And certainly the tools, as I mentioned, and people and process. I have been successful in advocating for a role specific to UX copy and content, and really being able to post that. And we are actively recruiting and hiring, and that is a huge win, because in my opinion, it really encapsulates this entire project, the impact of it, raises the awareness and the importance of this in the field, and for our organization really to be able to invest in this as a real important thing for our clients. They see that also, and the value that provides. Tons of things that I've learned along the way. There's quite a bit on successful UX copy. And again, you can double click. This is an article from TopTal on some best practices around UX copy. One of my favorites, yes, I did make the font bigger, even though it's tiny words. It's an article called Tiny Words Matter, and it's about microcopy and the opportunity really around delighting and connecting with users around microcopy. And so you can click into those links. There's tons of stuff out on UX writing, and this really great podcast on creating copy for a global, global audience at Netflix. And then there are also courses out there, micro courses, in fact, to become better copywriters. And interestingly, a lot of the folks that I've been interviewing, and copywriting in general tends to live in marketing and in PR. And there's such an opportunity to actually bring that back into UX, into design, into opportunities. I'm encouraging our engineers even, because who actually has a hand in the copy that goes to the user? It's usually our dev teams, because time is short. Just hurry up and put some copy in there. It's a placeholder. We'll go back and fix it. Most organizations, when they're running at that pace, they don't have the time to wait for marketing to approve the copy. Like, that is a really long process, right? And so they'll put some placeholders in. But if we can all learn some of these best practices, feel a little bit more confident, be a little bit more aware, then together, even through QA, our product team members, really to enhance the value overall, such an opportunity. And so, like, what would I do differently? There's now the question that people ask, like, well, what should you do? Create the copy first, or do you do the design first? And it's a chicken and egg issue. I really believe if you have the budget, the capacity, the talent, to do it together is best. It's not always possible, but like the approach that I shared, where we're trying to upskill everyone so that they are aware of these best practices, your business is going to have to do what your business does. And so I don't think it's right or wrong. There are pros and cons to both of them. But the big lesson learned for us is that translation was an afterthought, even though a global strategy was at the forefront. And so we learned a lot. I shy away from saying what we should have done, because we wouldn't have learned what we have learned now. I probably wouldn't have been able to advocate for a role called UX copy and content, right? We learned so much, and that to me is a lot more invaluable. And so going back to my personal identity as a word nerd, and identity researcher, and a learning product leader, words matter. Right? I get to advocate for that a lot now. Belonging matters, your identity, the identity of your users, and how they interface with those words or experiences. And I do couple that with semiotics and sign systems, and tons of research on emojis also that don't translate or do translate well. And as a product leader, really keeping that product leadership front of mind, the ideating, testing, learning, and you iterate, which is why I go back to, yeah, we could have done some things differently, but we wouldn't have learned what we did. And that's that.
Wow, thank you so much, Lauren. That was very informative, and I had no idea how you have to consider different countries and different translations and stuff. Very interesting.
Yeah, I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine, just from this presentation, I've learned a lot. I can imagine like actually experiencing all of it. So we're running out of time, but I just wanted to open the floor if anyone had any questions that they'd like to ask before we go.
I really enjoyed hearing. I'm curious to learn more about some of the micro wording that you were talking about, or messaging.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask if we could share this, and then if we have more questions, is that something we can follow up with you on, or maybe channel that through you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a follow-up, like just a QA session, and you can share this recording and the deck with folks and let them do a little kind of pre-thinking if you like. But yeah, I'm happy to follow up. Just like my experience, just like looking at that, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn here. What are we doing? It took a long time for me to be able to actually articulate the takeaways, and I'm really, really pleased to give you a sense of the timing. I was invited to start to explore this problem that we had in May. And today, right, last night, I finished this deck. So that's where we are. It has been really short, in my opinion, for the size of the organization we are and the number of clients and users we serve, and where we're at with a number of features and releases. And it has been quite an ordeal, and it's not my only job. That has been my advocacy for the role is because it couldn't be done full time. If I could do it full time and that were the only thing I was doing, I wouldn't have needed to create a role for it. So this is, again, just to give you a sense of the investment we have made. It's taken quite a bit of research.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving us a lot to absorb. I'm
Yes.
I have a lot of thoughts right now, so I don't.
Yeah, same. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I will share this deck with the team, and we'll reach out to you about our questions and any comments we have. And other than that, I'd like to say again, happy Friday, everybody. And I'll let you all go.
Well, thanks, Lauren.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye,
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.